Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, members of the Senate. I know that my debate will greatly change the outcome of this vote. Present to you now House Bill 68, House Bill 68, the state's general budget for 2026. Some thank yous that need to be given first. As you know, we worked with OPB in the off session. Appreciate their help. We also appreciate the work of Chairman Hatchett and his committee in the Senate, in the House, to get the bill over to the Senate. But a few other folks need to be thanked as well. Our Senate budget staff, who's scattered around the room: Lindsay, Courtney, Jennifer, Emily, Caitlin. I started this. I messed myself up. Caroline. Oh my goodness, how have I done this? Austin, Brent, Emma, and then of course y'all all know Miss Angela too. Miss Angela was here when I was an intern 20 years ago, and she is having her 39th birthday again today. Miss Angela, happy birthday. Thank you for everything you've done for Senate appropriations for over 20 years. What you also don't know is with the day that our bill was in committee, Miss Angela fell that morning and broke her arm, and her biggest concern was getting to the committee meeting, and we were trying to tell her that is not a concern. Please go get seen about. Your dedication is second to none. Thank you for all the help you've been to us. Also, I ask if you don't mind, give another round of applause for the Senate budget staff and everything they've done. Thank you for helping us be here. The Senate's budget realigns some of the funding you may have seen in the House, and it's a recognition of what we're looking at the national level. As you know, the federal government is in a position now to realign its budget, get its fiscal house in order for the first time in decades. We support that initiative, but it might mean some changes on the state level. In contrast, Georgia's done much differently. We've budgeted within our means for many, many decades. We have a balanced budget amendment, and we remain in the bottom 10% of states in per capita spending, even after a surge of spending and state-level taxes at the local level. Property taxes at the local level. The state has also continued to return billions of dollars to our citizens, even doing that again this year. $2.4 billion less collected this year in property taxes than would have been collected had we not begun reducing the income tax several years ago. And you have a commitment this year for us to continue to do that again. The Senate's budget prudently funds our priorities and the needs of the state without issuing more debt, even traditional debt that we've normally done in a bond package. And we rejected the urge to supplant federal funding from COVID-era programs that are expiring this year, including the ESSER and ARPA programs. We tried to hold true to funding formulas, whether that meant it increases or decreases in budgets, and the Senate budget eliminates certain programs that you'll see later on. It slows the growth of many positions that were added in the budget, and it questions invoices that were brought to us that did not have justification on how they were spent. The Senate's budget also prepares us for future years by enumerating in various lines the bills that required additional spending. And I really think that's the biggest takeaway of the Green Door or the subcommittee process this year, is we realize that a lot of the bills that we pass, a lot of the bills we're considering today, a lot of the bills we may be amending in the next few days, have a fiscal cost. Whether that cost is asking for a study from a department, it's adding a requirement in Medicaid, it's saying that we should allow an expansion of a program that already exists. Those expansions are not free. And we tried to go through this budget and lay out which bill required the additional spending, and you'll see that detailed in your Senate budget proposal. As you know, we spend roughly 54% of our budget on education. We spend roughly 23% of that budget in health. And I'm going to start by talking about health, the health part of our budget, and then maybe save education towards a little bit later on. In health, at the Department of Behavioral Health and Developmental Disabilities, over the past 5 years, we've seen about a 25% increase in that budget, and we continued that increase this year in mental health services. We added 200 now-comp waivers and annualized an additional 100 now-comp waivers. We also funded continued funding for the Macon Stabilization Center and kept a continued focus on forensic beds. It's something that we've heard that was a need from our prisons. We've heard it from our court system. We've heard it from our local sheriffs. and we've heard it from our Department of Behavioral Health and Developmental Disabilities. The Senate budget also eliminates a contract with a vendor who left state medical providers holding the bag for about $2.7 million in savings on that item. We also cut back and receded on funding that you saw may have been added in the House, again, trying to balance this budget. And we held House increases at the Georgia Housing Voucher Program, which was also, we know, a priority of the department, and to move out from under certain settlements that the state had entered in previously. We continued the Senate's priority to treat autism and support families whose children are afflicted with that. But we also had to say no to many worthy but not yet fully contemplated measures that also were in the DBHDD budget. At the Department of Community Health, we supported the House increases for provider rates for primary care codes and dental codes, but we did that at 1/2 the level that the House did. We also supported ABA therapy and a 3% rate increase there. We supported the full rate increase for neonatologists and maternal fetal medicine, and we did not support rate increases for ventilators, speech, or durable medical equipment. The Senate supported EMS rate increases at 5% for 7 EMS codes, and we began to increase funding to begin transport reimbursement at mile 6. Currently, the first 10 miles are not reimbursed. The House reimbursed 0 to 10. We decided to take it to 6 to 10. The Senate's proposal also funds PTSD and wraparound services for Georgia's veterans in DCH and their families. We continued the House and Governor practice of fully funding the skilled nursing facility audited cost reports, and we agreed with our House and held $3.1 million in our budget to support our independent pharmacies in the state health benefit plan. We also added $5 million into line items just a little bit below that for pharmacy reimbursement for drug dispensed to persons for self-administration in an amount equal to the national average acquisition cost, which is the NADAC. The Senate's budget also adds 150 new residency programs. We ask that the department apply for a state plan amendment so that those dollars can be maximized through Medicaid, just like the state of Florida has been able to do. In public health, we removed funds and eliminated the Georgia Coordinating Council. That saved about $3 million. We transferred duties there elsewhere, and we also sought opportunities to reduce future costs by funding certain viral hepatitis programs. The cost of those programs are very expensive on the back end. We wanted to try to address them up front. In public safety, for the courts, we began all positions and all pay raises as of January 1, which allowed the Senate to recoup some savings there. We also eliminated some laudable but not yet started initiatives, and we began a rate increase or a pay increase for prosecuting attorneys, acknowledging that we needed to raise their base pay in order to help them with retention. We did remain true to the formulas, however, related to prosecuting attorneys and to public defenders, and we started all of those rate increases, those pay increases, as of January 1. In corrections, also under public safety and for our purposes, the governor's proposal added about $125 million to the corrections proposal. The House added about $250, and we sort of split the middle in there and added about $170 million to new initiatives related to retention and security at our state prisons. In the GBI, we funded the Macon Crime Lab. We funded the lab equipment associated there, and we funded 5 portable mass spectrometers to assist in getting quicker results for assistant district attorneys and other departments who were awaiting the answer to proposals that have been brought to them concerning criminal matters by our law enforcement agencies. We held $100,000 for the cold case unit, which is a reduction from the House, but it's an increase to the base of that program over last year's budget. At CJCC, there was an ad for roughly $9 million for our victims assistance. It's related to our sexual assault centers and to other crisis centers related to victims assistance. We're expecting that they're anticipating $12 million of federal funds, so we pulled back on the $9 million increase on the state level there and told them instead to utilize and expect that $12 million in federal funding. At the Department of Juvenile Justice, we're very proud of the commissioner and the work she's done. We support the pay increases there at 8% in certain categories with high turnover and 4% in others. At public safety, we continue to be careful on the addition of additional staff, and we recognize the payments to chief of police and sheriffs in the amended budget rather than adding it to their base budgets, just to keep up with transparency there. I do believe that we will support any increases needed there in the amended budget. At the Department of Law, we pulled back slightly on the number of positions that were added, but we remain supportive of the gang prosecution units and the expansion of human trafficking units into Augusta and into Macon. We transferred $50,000 to the Judicial Council to just help resolve any dispute that may have arisen concerning whether or not the Department of Law can represent the judicial branch due to conflicts of branches and separation of powers. In the department and under transportation generally, roughly 7% of our budget. At DDS, we acknowledge the use of technology and support by requesting evidence that that technology has allowed them to reduce their need for additional personnel. And in the Department of Transportation, we continue the utilization of motor fuel for most construction and maintenance projects. We also held the House ad for airport aid, and we added $2 million based upon member requests for traffic improvements in the Cumberland CID area. Education, roughly 54% of our budget depending on the year. At the Department of Early Care and Learning, DECAL, we supported the Governor and House recommendation for 500 additional state-funded CAP slots. We're now on our way to funding those without federal help. That would mean we've now raised that number to about 50,000 CAPS slots statewide. We continued to fund our pre-K program and agreed with the House and the Governor with $14 million increase to continue phase-in of the reduced class sizes from 22 to 20. At the Department of Education, we continued, as you know, to fully fund the QBE teaching formula. We did reduce other funds based on testing from previous budget years, and we took some reductions based upon utilization. We did increase funds for character education, and we funded at a different level a program that passed on a Senate bill by the senator from the 45th last year relating to school supplies in the classroom. Literacy. You know it has been an issue of this chamber for many years, championed by the senator of the 4th and others. The Senate did not change any House dollars as it relates to literacy. In student services, the House and the Senate deleted an initiative that was begun by the House. We took it to zero, but it shouldn't be considered zero because we pulled forward APEX funding out of the Department of Behavioral Health that's already being used for mental health services in our schools, combined it with $5 million additional dollars, and parked it there instead. We took it out of the student support services line and rolled it into school safety. The reason we did that is we do believe that the mental health of our students is directly related to the safety of our schools. We did not support the House's ad of $28 million for a targeted program related to the economically disadvantaged, instead choosing to recognize the over $1.5 billion in the base that supports this effort. We did support increased funds of about $12.5 million for out-of-school care, and in the Senate's biggest budget move, we restored, fully funded the Promise Scholarship at 1% of QBE, which is $141 million. This would allow 21,000 students and their families options when their schools that they would otherwise be attending are in the bottom quartile of schools of our state. In Regents, we reduced funds at Georgia Cyber Center. This is based upon 5 years ago. I guess now they've been started for about 7 years. 5 years ago, they were going to move to be fully self-supported on rents. We're now in, I believe, year 7, maybe even year 8. So we're just reducing their state general funds to continue the trend to support their move on to being self-sufficient. And we did not support the House's addition of additional funds into the micro grant program. We did support the technology research into the peanut industry, and we kept the House cut to public law schools but returned the base funding for legal clinics. In ERS, employees' retirement, the House had a line that was for $23 million to allow for a 13th payment of sorts for state retirees. The Senate committee increased those funds to almost $76 million for annual payments to state retirees. and to help with record high inflation they've experienced over the past half decade. We also want to use part of those funds to improve the funded ratio, which is necessary if they're ever going to be able to start up and recommence their COLA program. In general government, which is just about everything else I haven't already mentioned, at the Department of Ag, we did acknowledge the state's significant concern with avian flu and want to support the state's poultry industry there. We also continued to fund future lab needs at the agency. As you know, we did part of this already, roughly $40 million in the amended budget for buildings. Also at the state farmers market, there was an additional add. We have continued to fund those with plans to reconstruct the office on Capitol Hill. There's now discussion about putting the lab that used to be on Capitol Hill out at the state farmers market, and there's a plan to do that. The House had that plan funded at half the amount, $20-ish million. The Senate funded it instead as a planning bond of $4 million. That allowed us to recoup some savings, but also make sure that we're completely on the same page with the department and the House concerning whatever we're going to put at the state farmers market, knowing that that's going to be a multi-decade investment. Feral hogs have been plaguing our farmers. There was a $500,000 ad in the House related to feral hogs. The Senate has a much different proposal. That $500 million was supposed to be used to buy pens that cost roughly $14,000 each. You basically corral, like a buffalo run, the hogs into pens, and then they eradicate them from there. $500,000 to do so. The Senate's proposal leverages our hunters in the state and instead creates a reward-based program based on the number of hogs eradicated with weekly payouts to eliminate the feral hog program. Not only do we think that's going to be more effective, we're able to fund it at 20% of the otherwise requested cost. At Community Affairs, the Department of Community Affairs, there were areas where providers were unable to provide receipts for expenditures. We zeroed out those items in the future. We supported the City of Albany's efforts to continue its support of history and childhood learning in its downtown. And we supported the plans of the Governor and House to reduce various programs, consolidate those, and make them more efficient for services provided to our citizens. We also reduced two of our state's largest economic programs, the State Economic Development Program, two of our state's largest economic development programs, the REBA program and the One Georgia program. We'd had various legislative ads over the years. Since we're now at a position where we need to start looking at every dollar even more scrupulously, we reduced the legislative ads that have been added to those programs over the years. In the Department of Economic Development, we recognized base funding instead of increasing funds at the MLK Center, and we delayed support of the Super Bowl 62 and 2031 NCAA Final Four programs for the same reasons that we stated in the amended budget. Super Bowl 62 is 3 years away, as you know. The NCAA Final Four for 2031 is 6 years away. If we're going to fund those now, we would allow those entities to hold the interest on state funds. Why would we not hold those $7 million and the interest on those in state funds? Allow those dollars to further be used to reduce property taxes, income taxes, whatever we decide, and fund those things instead in the years that they're occurring. At DHS, we were able to reduce funds based upon a new program. We had an employee come to us years ago and say, hey, the contract for verifying wage and labor data has gone overboard. It keeps going up every year. There's a Georgia-based company that did it. We think we can do it cheaper in-house if we're able to bid that out on a reverse auction. That idea has been successful, and it's going to allow us to actually reduce that funding item by $2 million this year. At the Department of Labor, we pulled back some ads that were put in by the House just to give the new commissioner time to prepare her plan moving forward. And at Natural Resources, we left $1 million for beach restoration, $349,000 concerning red breast coastal fishing that relates to some of the reef fishing there, and surveys, complications of those surveys with federal programs. We reduced EPA's budget by $581,000 to streamline their contracting process. And we pulled back increases that had been added for the venison processing and chronic wasting disease programs. We think they're both important, but they have base funding. We wanted to recognize that rather than making additional adds. Public Service Commission, we were able to support their retention request, and we were able to reduce expenditures for the forest land protection land grants at the Department of Revenue based upon previous year's expenditures. We provided $600,000 to the state election board that's under the Secretary of State, and we gave some language concerning reducing rents at other places, again, helping to promote efficiencies there. And in our Department of Veterans, the Senate's budget adds $3.5 million to various veterans-related care, and we're extremely excited about the standing up and opening, and continuing rather, of the subacute care unit that's coming online later this year. You know, we normally bond capital projects in our budget. You're not going to see a bond package in the Senate's proposal. We're funding that with cash, saving generations 10 and 20 years from now for paying for the buildings that we're building currently. We disagreed with the House's plan to move with a bond package, again, opting instead to fund these cash initiatives, or these initiatives with cash, and that caused us to have to delay a couple of projects as well. We had to delay the project at Ag. I already told you, you're doing it instead with a planning bond, and we had to delay a project at the Department of Juvenile Justice that probably wasn't ready to go yet anyway. The capital project list, however, is not going to have very many adds, and I want to prepare you. That's probably the way it's going to be in years moving forward. We did fund design at Augusta Tech, and we were able to fund a building at the University of North Georgia with an alternate fund source. But funding for other capital resources generally is just going to align with what you already saw come from the second floor in the original budget proposal. One thing I do want to point out to you that we did different this year. You've got your budget. You get it on your desk each year. If you turn to the first white page, you will see a list We are often asked in Georgia why we don't just take our state income tax to zero. State income tax in Georgia makes up about $16 billion. And we can take that to zero. But we have to decide what we want to otherwise exempt first. See, states around us, Tennessee, Florida, Texas, we're here now Mississippi. Georgia does not tax things that those other states do. Let's use, for instance, Texas. If a plumber comes to your house, if an auto mechanic's fixing your car, if a builder's building your house, the state of Georgia does not charge sales tax on that labor. You know this. You pay your labor bill based on what the labor cost was, no additional tax. In Texas, there's a 6.25% tax on that labor. That's a policy decision for us to make in the future. Would we like to tax labor like Texas does instead of income? I really would love for us to have that debate. If we were to tax services instead in Georgia, if you look on the chart that we gave you of the tax credits and tax exemptions in our state that are on page 1 of your budget now, that's an additional $12.2 billion. If we wish to tax services instead, we can move to almost eliminate the state income tax overnight. We could also decide that we want to end some of these other exemptions. They're laid out there for you. The tax on manufacturing, on energy use in manufacturing, that's about $4.8 billion in sales tax exemptions there. The standard deduction for personal exemption, that's about $3.4 billion. The retirement income exemption on our state income tax, that's about $2.1 billion. The sales tax exemption on all food consumption, off-premises food consumption, that's about $1 billion. The sales tax exemption on drugs and prescription drugs and contact lenses, that's about a little over $500 million. The sales tax exemption on lottery tickets, that's almost $300 million. So I tell you, we're going to get asked to vote on a lot of credits and a lot of exemptions after this budget passes in the next 3 days. What I want to highlight for you is that every time you do that, you move further and further away from what my personal goal is of being able to reduce the state income tax further. Think about that as you vote. The list on the front book hopefully gives you some pause to question and think about matters moving forward. And again, as to the budget overall, thank you for allowing me to chair the budget now for the 6th year. And Mr. President, if there are no questions, I'll yield the will.
You do have a few questions.
Yeah.
Recognize the Senator from the 26th.
Senator Yield.
Yes, sir. Sorry.
Senator, I want to thank you for doing what you could to make sure that the crime lab in Macon
Yes, sir.
is up and running. Question for you. Where are we with the Department of Corrections and the feds dealing with the prison system?
Yes, sir. I don't know where we are with the feds. I know that we're going to try to address our own issues if federal intervention or not. You saw that we put almost $1 billion extra in the amended budget relating to security, relating to locks. This budget on the Senate side includes about $170 million, focused mostly on retention of employees. We've got to increase the pay at our state prisons. We're asking them to do a job that I venture to say very few of us would be willing to do if we were put in that situation. So the commissioner has been able to improve retention greatly, which is why you have one of the big additions you do have in this budget. They were funding pay increases in the past off of vacancies. The fact that we're having to include money here should tell us that that work on our retention program is being successful.
Recognize the Senator from the 4th.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Yield,
Yes, sir.
I really appreciate you bringing this to our attention. I think we need to study this. We need to look at it. By any chance, have you added up these numbers, or some of the budget staff added up these numbers?
I could do it very quickly. And you're talking about the sales tax exemptions and tax credits exemptions?
I'm talking about everything. In fact,
Yes, sir.
if you want me to, I've done it. You want me to tell you what it is?
Well, yes, sir. And I'll tell you, though, that that's not all of them. We only took and included the biggest 11. There's over 100.
Well, these biggest 11 account for $26.64 billion. And what is our budget amount?
Our total state general funds budget's around $37 billion.
So this amounts to about 2/3 of our budget.
So the math would tell you if we're able to eliminate exemptions and credits, we can reduce our taxes further. We can.
Thank you, Senator.
Recognize the Senator from the 38th.
Thank you, Mr. President. Does the chairman yield?
Yes, sir.
Thank you for all your hard work on the budget. I did have a couple questions. One, student support services, 167.1.
Yeah, let me get to that.
Looks like the House proposed adding about $20 million for establishing mental health support grants, and was curious why we are taking that out.
Yeah, and when I was presenting it, you may have missed when I told you this. We did not take it out. We zeroed it out. You said, give me the line item again.
167.1. And it references 164.2.
You go to 164.2.
Yep.
We already fund a program called APEX.
Yep.
It's been at the Department of Behavioral Health. What we tried to do is bring that program and the funding that's related to mental health services in schools already, recognize that in this area, and add to it additional state general funds. That dollar we ended up at was around $14 million, not the House's $19 million. But we're supporting the exact same program at a different amount and doing it instead in the school safety program.
So when you say a different amount, is it at the same amount or is it lower?
It's
than what
lower
the
now.
House-
It's $5 million lower,
Okay, got you. And then,
but still a $14 million increase,
right, and then for
$5 million increase.
the weight for targeting students for economically disadvantaged. I know you mentioned this.
Yes, sir.
The House proposed $28 million. Is it not true that Georgia's only one of 6 states that does not provide an additional weight? Understanding we do get Title I funding,
Right.
but Georgia does not provide an additional weight in our QBE formula to educate students that are identified as economically disadvantaged.
See,
Is that not true?
I disagree with that. I know that that's been a point of GBI and many others for years. I believe that the program we already have about equalization is meant to fund a poverty weight. That program we fund at roughly, let's see here, equalization is about $900 million for the state, $909 million. That is specifically meant to go to and help balance low poverty school systems. The biggest recipient is actually Gwinnett County because of the number of children in poverty that they have there.
But is it not true that an additional $28 million would have helped school districts across the state that have students that would have qualified for this grant program?
Again, back to the original question, are we one of 6 states? I have to say that that's not true. I don't know that those other 44 states have an equalization program, so I don't think we're talking apples and apples here.
Okay. And then finally, had a question about the social workers. It was recommended from the House of $5 million, and we're just saying $266,000.
Yes, sir.
Curious about that reduction.
At the House, they were looking at funding a social worker in various school systems. Under the QBE formula, we already fund a social worker based upon the number of students at each school. So this to us kind of looked like a partial double dip. It's like if we're already funding a social worker based on the number of students you have, head count, and QBE, why are we now being asked to fund it again? If you don't mind, I'd like to take a little point of personal privilege on this one. That is the reason we really need to take a look at the QBE formula as a whole.
Yes.
We might be looking at it for different reasons.
I understand, but
because
yes,
we have given so many waivers of Title 20.
I agree with you.
There is no requirement anymore that local school systems follow the funding mechanism that we laid out in QBE. QBE is now a block grant, not very different from what we do block granting money to regents. Now, there's 2 systems that still don't have those waivers to Title 20, but we have 181 systems. Only 2 have to follow the state's funding mechanism. That means the monies that we put into pre-K could be used in high school. Well, preschool and K that we use in kindergarten could be used in high school. That's probably a little bit better because pre-K is slightly separate. Yeah. But that means the dollars that you think as a policymaker you're placing into certain categories, they don't have to flow there for 179 out of the 181 districts.
Well, Mr. Chairman, it may surprise you that I do agree with you, so I look forward to working with you on that. Thank you.
Recognize Senator from 36.
Thank you, Mr. President. This is Chairman of Appropriations.
Yes, ma'am.
I wanted to just raise a couple of points, and I'm sure it's fair to say that there are things in this, everybody can find something in this budget that they like, and everybody can find something in this budget that they would do differently. That's
sure
probably a pretty fair statement to make. And I, on one count, the situation that we are facing, and it's been widely observed and tackled from a number of different ways, is homelessness and chronically mentally ill people in the streets. And Atlanta is a big receptacle for that. And it seems pervasive and obvious, and the city works on it all the time. And this budget does not put money in for Mercy Care and Partners for Home that has been in the budget before. You know, that it falls short of what the chamber has asked for, the city has asked for, and so that we all come to this great city and do our work here, and so are keenly aware of the problems that we face, and so that would be one that I would hope we could do some in the conference committee that we can work out between the House and the Senate to see those needs addressed.
Do you want me to address that one first?
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for the question. As you know, we added funds for housing and homelessness last year in the budget.
That's right.
We asked for some accountability as to how that spending had been doled out, and we're unable to get some answers. So, we've got a couple of more hours, I'm sure, before we head to a conference committee. So maybe someone will be able to provide us some answers on how that money was spent. If that money was not spent in a way and a measure that we feel is the intention of this body, I think as stewards of taxpayer funds, we have a duty to remove those from the budget.
Thank you for that. And then another, I think, important thing that we did in this budget is really ramp up our commitment to our retirees in funding that was added. I think that the House had 25 million, and we added 50 million more. Is that right?
Roughly, yes, ma'am.
Roughly. Yep.
That, I'm sure, will be a discussion for the House and
Of course.
where their priorities are in conference.
But I wanted to appreciate and applaud that effort on our part here in this budget. Thank you.
Thank you.
Recognize Senator from the 52nd.
Thank you, Mr. President. Will the senator yield?
Yes, sir.
We appreciate our appropriations chair, and I appreciate this information being on the front page. Isn't it true that you and I and others in the Finance Committee had passed a bill last year that was going to list all of these? However, we were told that it was impractical to put 200 additional pages into the budget. And so I appreciate the top 11 being on here in lieu of the 200 pages of all the credits. And isn't it also true that the senator from the 53rd has suggested a study committee on eliminating the income tax? And based on this information, couldn't we do this in one meeting in about 30 minutes?
What do you know? I did the work of the senator from the 53rd for him. What can I say? Actually, I can't take credit for that. The Senate Budget Office was very involved. So.
Yeah. Thanks again for your hard work on this.
Yes, sir.
You got one more question, Senator. Recognize Senator from the 35th.
Does the gentleman yield?
Yes, sir.
Just to piggyback off the previous question about the QB poverty rate,
Yes, sir.
Understand the concerns around QB, and I share in those concerns. I think it's time to update the formula. I just want to make sure that when we talk about, isn't it right that when we talk about equalization, and if it's a county like Gwinnett, for example, they received, according to their website in 2024, $88.7 million, but QBE has this funky thing called local fair share.
Local 5 mil share.
Right,
Yes, sir.
where they had to pay in to QBE $224 million.
I don't
Isn't
think
that
it's funky. What we recognize is that education funding in Georgia is a local and state partnership. You may not know this, but in the state constitution, the education of our youth is a constitutional provision protected in Georgia's constitution. So to get to the 20% funding level, we view that, it's actually been to the Georgia Supreme Court. Actually, it may have been to the U.S. Supreme Court. I have to check back on who gave this opinion. Georgia's funding formula was found constitutional. I think it's the only one that was, which leaves the state funding roughly 80% of education K-12 level and the locals funding 20%.
And that was
On the QBE formula.
about 30 years ago. Isn't that right?
I don't think the Supreme Court's changed their precedent on it yet.
Well, no, I'm just, isn't it true that today Georgia, the state, does not fund 80%
Oh,
of
no,
education?
in the of the QBE formula, yes, sir, we still do.
Got it.
We're
But
actually required to.
not education generally, though.
You're right. The local property taxes have gone out of control, and usually most people's local property taxes, over 50% of it goes to the education entity as well.
And isn't it true that the majority of education, public school education funding, comes from those property taxes?
I do not know. I think that's district by district. Down my way, the majority of the funding is still, I believe, state funded.
What, does the gentleman further yield?
Yes, sir.
are we doing in this budget to prepare for the ongoing cuts to federal dollars? There are several different areas where I see federal grants and federal funding that we're relying on in this budget. What are we doing to prepare for those cuts, some of which have already been announced, but specifically around healthcare?
Yeah, well, let's talk about that. First, I think Georgia's in a better position than most states related to any federal spending change because we did not expand Medicaid early on. Governor Deal told us that if we were to expand Medicaid, one day that 90% carrot that was laid out by the feds would one day be reduced. And turns out, we didn't know it would be 8 years after he was out of office, but it looks like he may be right on that. So Georgia's in a better position than most states because we didn't take the federal carrot at the time. As far as our Medicaid spending right now, I'm not aware of any change. I've heard proposals, but I'm not aware of any changes that have already been approved to change any FMAP at the state level. If there is an FMAP change, I want to be fully transparent to you. It would mean a change to the state budget. Even a 0.1% change is probably tens of millions in dollar changes. But thankfully, since we have not taken the urge of others to spend everything that we have in our surplus, the state stands in a position not only from our surplus standing, but also from a position of taking a fiscal conservative approach even in this budget that we should be able to withstand anything I think we would see from the feds.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much again for allowing me to present the budget to you. I really appreciate your thorough questions. You've been so involved in this process, and it means a lot to me, and it means a lot to the subcommittee chairs who also helped get us to this point. I ask for your favorable consideration of the Senate Committee substitute to House Bill 68.